They erased my name from the guest list. But the yacht? The yacht has always been mine. I'm Marjorie, and I start my mornings slowly. A cup of coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the small crack near the handle I've never bothered to replace. The kitchen window lets in just enough sun to make the granite counters gleam. My husband, Lyle, had already left for a client meeting, leaving behind a trace of aftershave and a half-eaten banana. I was scrolling through my phone, mostly out of habit, thumbing through emails and calendar alerts, when I noticed a post from my niece. And there it was, the entire Preston family on the yacht. Champagne in hand, laughter frozen in a boomerang, the wake trailing behind them like a ribbon. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The cruelest part wasn't the exclusion. It was realizing how many mornings I'd sat at their tables, convincing myself I belonged, only to discover I'd never actually had a seat at all. And when the staff later greeted me with, "Welcome aboard, owner," I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was true. But I kept asking myself, why did that truth shake them more than the lie ever did? My thumb hovered over the screen, frozen in place. The boomerang kept looping, champagne catching the light, glasses chiming together, that familiar yacht railing in the background. I read the caption again. Family getaway tradition loading. Can't wait to set sail. Tradition. That word landed differently when you were not part of it. I clicked through to the full post, then to another. Valora's smile, her arm looped through her husband's. Tom, the identical twin. My mother-in-law, Ophelie, holding a mimosa with the relaxed ease of someone who belonged there. Lyle's younger cousin and his fiancée. Everyone who mattered. Everyone except me. I knew there was a family group chat. I had been added to Preston Legacy Voyagers years ago, then quietly removed after some incident with a dinner seating chart. A long story. I checked anyway. Empty. No messages, no notes, no gentle oversight. Just silence where my name should have been. I set my phone down. The coffee beside me had gone cold. My pulse was steady. That was the worst part, the complete absence of surprise. Just a slow, quiet confirmation settling into my chest like sediment finding the bottom of still water. The group chat held nothing. No messages, not a single email about the trip. I stared at my phone, the coffee cooling beside me. My pulse wasn't racing. Not exactly. It was something worse. Stillness. A sinking confirmation that this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. That afternoon, while rinsing out a glass in the kitchen sink, my phone buzzed with a message from Valora. But it wasn't meant for me. It was a screenshot of a group text. A photo of the finalized cabin assignments under portside guest rooms. A name had been crossed out. Mine. Next to it, confirmed for Belle. Belle. Valora's yoga instructor. The one who'd once asked me if I was Lyle's assistant. The next message was a voice note. Valora's voice mid-laugh. Well, at least the energy on board won't be so tight this year. I set the phone down without responding. My hands were steady, but my jaw ached from clenching. At dinner that evening, I didn't mention it right away. Lyle was distracted, scrolling through stock alerts between bites of salmon. Did you know your family's planning another yacht trip? I asked lightly. He glanced up. Yeah, Mom mentioned it last week. I think they're still finalizing the list. I tilted my head. Am I on the list? He frowned, put down his fork. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? He glanced up from his plate. Yeah, Mom mentioned it last week. I think they're still finalizing the list. I tilted my head. Am I on the list? He frowned, put down his fork. Of course. Why wouldn't you be? I smiled just enough to keep the tension from rising. Just curious. He went back to his phone. I'll double check. He wouldn't. He never did. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand, one by one. It's funny how silence can say more than shouting. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan blades slicing through the air. Over and over, my mind replayed every moment I'd been quietly pushed out. Birthdays with no invitation. Brunches I found out about from Instagram stories. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect warmth from Valora. But this was deliberate. The worst part? No one would say it out loud. No one had to. At some point, you stop asking why they don't include you. You start asking yourself why you kept trying to belong. Before I turned off the bedside lamp, I pulled my journal from the drawer and wrote one sentence in steady ink. Watch. Don't react yet. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Valora. I pulled my journal from the drawer and wrote one sentence in steady ink. Watch. Don't react yet. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Valora. It was one of those messages that sounded polite if you didn't read between the lines and cut like a blade if you did. Hey, Marjorie. Just realizing we may have missed reserving a spot for you on the yacht. Totally my oversight. The trip filled up quicker than expected this year. So sorry. Hope we can catch up after. There it was. Her signature blend of sweet poison. Short, chirpy, coded in emojis and passive apologies. No room for conversation. No offer to fix it. Just a casual admission that I had been erased, dressed up as a logistical slip-up. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust my fingers not to betray the composure I was clinging to. I reread the message, then closed my phone and got dressed. My plan had been to go to the farmer's market that morning. Instead, I sat at the kitchen counter, still in jeans and a sweater, drinking coffee that had long gone cold. Mid-morning, an email popped into my inbox from the charter company. Cancellation confirmation. Cabin release successfully processed. I blinked, opened it, read it again. The request had been logged 3 days prior. Name of the requester, Valora Preston. The cancellation email arrived mid-morning from the charter company. Cabin release successfully processed. The request had been submitted 3 days earlier, Valora Preston. The timestamp told me everything. She'd done this while I was still picking out a birthday card for Lyle, while I was pretending this family might include me. I printed the email and placed it in the manila folder I kept in my bottom drawer. Tax plus property. One copy, crisp and clean, joining whatever would come next. When Lyle came home, the light had gone amber across the living room floor. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his keys. I waited until he had a beer in his hand before speaking. Valora texted me. He leaned against the counter. Oh. She forgot to reserve me a spot on the yacht trip. He frowned, not shock, but the careful neutral expression he wore when something might require effort. Really? That seems odd. She called it a miscommunication. Maybe it was just that. You know how she is. I watched him take another drink and say nothing further. I added his words to the folder. Evidence came in many forms, some printed, some recorded in the shape of silence. I told him that evening. Straightforward, no drama. Valora's text. The cancellation request dated 3 days ago. I watched his face for the flicker, the micro-expression of a man caught between his sister and his wife. Really? That seems odd. He said it like a question but answered it like a shield. A miscommunication, he said. You know how chaotic these things get. It wasn't a miscommunication. I kept my voice level. I got a cancellation email. It was submitted by her 3 days ago. He didn't look at me. Just swirled the bottle in his hand like it might show him a smarter response. Maybe she thought plans had changed. Or that we weren't coming. We weren't? I said. He stopped. Exhaled. Let's not assume the worst. She replaced my name with someone else's. That's not an assumption. It's a receipt. He went quiet. And in that quiet, I heard everything I needed to. Later, after he'd retreated to the den to zone out to ESPN, I sat at the dining room table and opened my laptop. I didn't scroll old photos looking for myself. I didn't dig through memories searching for proof I belonged. Instead, I opened a new note. I titled it, Things She's Done That I Let Slide. The list flowed faster than I expected. I opened a new note and titled it, Things She's Done That I Let Slide. The list flowed faster than I expected. Forgot to include me in Rachel's bridal shower email chain. Sent the group Christmas itinerary without my name twice. Accidentally tagged the wrong Marjorie in a family Facebook post and left it up for days. Scheduled brunch the day after telling me they were taking a break from gatherings. By the time I finished, my jaw ached again, not from anger this time, but from clarity. Right before I was about to shut my laptop, another message came through. Not from Valora, from her assistant. It seemed someone I didn't know personally, but who had once emailed me about catering options. Attached was a screenshot. Another group message thread, most likely meant for a different recipient. Valora, don't worry. She's not coming. I handled it. She handled it. I don't know how long I stared at those 4 words, but when I blinked, the room was darker. The clock read past 10 and Lyle was still in the den pretending none of this existed. I stood up, crossed the kitchen, and reached for the manila folder. I added the email and the screenshot printout, then closed it with care. This wasn't about a cabin. It never was. I sat on the edge of my bed and breathed. Morning arrived the way it always does, quiet, indifferent, and I reached for my phone the way you reach for a mirror. Just to check. Just to confirm what I already knew. The Instagram post was already there. A boomerang of champagne glasses, the sun hitting the water just right, the whole Preston family clustered on the deck. Valora at the center, glass raised. Lyle beside her, smiling in that distant way he smiles when he's performing for a camera. And around them, the whole parade of cousins and aunts and family friends I'd smiled at weddings, nodded to at funerals, pretended not to notice when they looked through me at dinner parties. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I'd been on that yacht twice in 5 years of marriage. The first time, Valora introduced me to the captain as Lyle's friend, she's helping with the food. The second time, I was given a cabin the size of a closet and told the larger rooms were for family. I remember standing on the deck that second time, watching them laugh at inside jokes I'd never be let in on, and thinking, this is what it feels like to be a ghost who still has a pulse. But that morning, I didn't feel ghost-like. I felt something colder. Calmer. Because that Instagram post wasn't the story. It was just the picture they'd chosen to illustrate a story that had been written long before I picked up my phone. The email came at 9:47 a.m. Valora's name in the sender line. The subject line read, Cancellation Confirmation. Cabin release successfully processed. And the body was 3 sentences long, worded with the kind of careful precision that meant someone had rehearsed it. She was writing to apologize. An oversight. The guest list had been finalized before anyone realized I wasn't on it. She was so sorry. She hoped I could understand. I read it twice. Then I walked to the kitchen and reached for the manila folder. I added the email and the screenshot printout, then closed it with care. This wasn't about a cabin. It never was. I sat on the edge of my bed, folder in my lap, staring at the word cancellation printed in sharp, emotionless font across the top of the yacht company's email. I had read it so many times that the ink felt etched into my eyes. But the truth wasn't in the email. It was in everything that came before it. The yacht wasn't just a boat, not to me. It was the first thing I ever bought that no one handed to me. No one helped me with. It was mine. Born from 5 years of late nights, skipped vacations, rejections from investors who said things like, "You've got a great smile, but we're going with someone more aggressive." They meant male. They just didn't say it. Back then, I ran deliveries myself when drivers quit last minute. I walked into meetings in heels with no cushion, wearing second-hand blazers that I had steamed in gas station bathrooms. And through it all, I kept telling myself, you don't need their validation. Just build the thing. Make it real. When the company finally turned a profit, not a little one, but the kind that makes the silence on the other end of the phone go quiet, I knew exactly what I wanted to buy. But that morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call Valora. I opened my journal and I wrote one line, "Watch. Don't react yet." For years, I told myself not to need their validation. Just build the thing. Make it real. When the company finally turned a profit, not a modest one, but the kind that makes investors crawl back with sheepish grins, I didn't buy a designer bag or a car. I bought that yacht quietly, without fanfare. I still remember signing the check. My hand didn't even shake. There was a strange calm, like I'd finally stepped into a version of myself I'd been trying to prove existed. Legally, I'd put Lyle's name on the papers too. Tax stuff, the accountant had said. Better for trusts, easier down the road. Down the road, indeed. Within months, the yacht became part of the family lore, but not my lore. It was Lyle's yacht. The Preston family's sea legacy. Valora's exact words at one of the last brunches I was still invited to. She lifted her glass and said, "It's so meaningful to have traditions tied to something we own as a family. It makes our legacy feel tangible." Then she turned to me briefly, eyes tight. "And how wonderful that Marjorie supports it." Supports it. Like I was some event planner. Not the reason it existed. The Instagram post appeared like any other morning interruption, casual, cheerful, devastating. Champagne toasts on the deck, Valora at the center, Lyle beside her smiling at something outside the frame. The entire Preston family, everyone I'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner with, everyone I'd smiled at across polished wood tables. All of them. All except me. I scrolled past it once, then again. The yacht in the background was mine. Not Preston family legacy, not their continuity or their story, but mine. The one I'd bought with deliveries I'd driven myself, in a blazer steamed in gas station bathrooms, in years when sleep was a luxury and doubt was a door I refused to open. I'd been invited twice in 4 years of marriage. Twice made to feel like a guest at my own table, a +1 to my own life. The cancellation email arrived that afternoon. Valora's signature at the bottom, polite as a scalpel, cabin release confirmed, hopes for next time. As if it were an oversight. As if I'd simply been forgotten. Lyle glanced at it. "She probably just assumed you'd be busy." He handed the phone back. That was all. I opened my journal. One line. "Watch. Don't react yet." I pulled every document I'd tucked away over the years, ownership papers, bank wires, the original yacht catalog I had marked up with notes. I laid them across the bed like evidence in a trial I hadn't planned to prosecute until now. There was no outburst, no tears. Just a low, simmering resolve that started near my collarbone and pulsed downward like a steel thread tightening inside me. "You tried to disappear me," I whispered, running my finger over the inked signature that proved otherwise. "Now watch." They streamed the dinner live. Valora's profile was still flagged in my notifications from when I once tried to belong. There was the whole family, gathered around that table, champagne in hand, laughing like I'd never existed at all. And I saw it, the shape of what they'd built without me, and the shape of everything I'd let them leave out. They streamed the dinner live. I didn't even have to search for it, Valora's profile was already flagged in my notifications, a leftover setting from when I once tried to be part of the family digital life. It popped up while I was folding laundry, the audio playing before I realized what it was. Laughter echoed in the background. Glasses clinking. A long table covered in gold-rimmed plates and eucalyptus runners stretched across a candlelit room. The caption read, "Preach family dinner, so grateful for legacy and love." I stood there holding one of Lyle's button-downs like it had betrayed me. There they were, all of them. Oily at the head of the table. Valora in her usual center of attention seat. Her husband and the twins. A few cousins I hadn't seen in years. And Lee's aunt who always claimed she didn't like boats. Apparently, she'd changed her mind. No one had mentioned this dinner to me. Not a text. Not a call. It wasn't an oversight. It was orchestration. Then Valora stood to make a toast. Her tone was soft. Practiced. When we gather like this, I'm reminded of what makes our family unique. It's not just tradition. It's the people who carry that tradition with intention. Heads nodded. Cameras panned. And I watched my husband raise his glass to words that tasted like a door closing. But silence, I've learned, is also a form of evidence. That night, I waited until he was out of the shower. He came into the bedroom in flannel pants and a t-shirt with some faded college logo, hair still damp. I clicked play on the video. He stood there watching. Arms crossed. His face didn't change, didn't react, just waited for it to end. When it did, I looked at him. She really said that. He rubbed his jaw. Valora likes theatrics. You know that. I'm not sure that's the defense you think it is. She was probably just trying to sound thoughtful. And there it was. Not denial, not apology, not even curiosity about what I'd just watched. Just smooth, practiced deflection. The kind I'd grown so accustomed to I'd almost stopped noticing. I didn't push. I didn't need to. In that moment, something shifted, not anger, not sadness, but a strange, cold clarity. I reached for my journal on the nightstand. Wrote one line. No date. No address. Asterisk watch. Don't react yet, asterisk. The page felt heavy with everything I wasn't saying. But I'd learned that the best evidence isn't the loudest. It's patient. It waits. And somewhere in a folder on my desk labeled for taxes, for property, for things that outlive families, somewhere in that folder were years of moments I'd been collecting without even knowing I was collecting them. I nodded. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. I just absorbed the shape of his indifference, the weight of it. Later, alone in the kitchen, I made tea. I didn't drink it. Instead, I pulled out a box of keepsakes we'd never unpacked when we moved. At the bottom, I found an old invite to Rachel's baby shower, the one they'd claimed must have gotten lost in the mail. I remembered calling Valora that day, asking for the address. She'd laughed and said, "Oh, that's this weekend. I totally thought you weren't in town." But I had been in town. I'd sent the gift weeks before. I held the envelope like it was evidence, not of crime, just of a history I could no longer pretend wasn't deliberate. The next morning, I printed Valora's speech transcript from the live stream. I highlighted the sentence about those who understand legacy. I slipped it into the folder with the rest. Then I typed a message to Valora. I hope your speech felt honest. We'll see how it holds up in person. The morning I left for Newport, I didn't pack for a vacation. I packed for a verdict. Valora's speech transcript was already printed, that single line about legacy highlighted in yellow. It slid into the folder with everything else I'd been gathering, not to prove anything to her, but to remind myself of what I'd let them bury. Then I typed the message. 6 words, no punctuation, no emoji, no explanation. She'd know exactly what I meant. The folder grew heavier as I worked. Bank transfers from years ago, email confirmations, ownership papers with a name I'd quietly changed back. The highlighted transcript from that dinner speech. Each page fitted into its sleeve, organized with the same care I'd once given quarterly reports. By the time I closed the folder, it held more truth than anyone on that yacht would be ready for. I booked the car that afternoon. No bathing suit made it into my bag. No sandals. I didn't even glance at the drawer where they lived. Instead, I laid out each document like evidence in a trial only I knew was coming. Then I chose my outfit, a simple navy dress, professional and neutral, not designed to impress anyone. This wasn't about fitting in anymore. This was about stepping in. The kitchen was still dark when I came downstairs, but the smell of coffee reached me before the light did. Lyle stood at the counter, scrolling through news alerts on his phone, a plate of dry toast beside him untouched. He looked up when I appeared, and I wondered what he saw, not curiosity, not concern, just the surface of things he'd stopped looking beneath. I didn't explain where I was going. I didn't need to. Not yet. The folder was labeled Tax Plus Property in my own handwriting, a label I'd almost forgotten I'd written. I opened it, and years of moments I'd dismissed came undone. Emails where my name vanished from guest lists. Screenshots of brunch invitations sent to everyone but me. A text chain where Valora told her assistant, "She's not coming." I handled it. The assistant had accidentally forwarded it to me. No apology followed. Then I found the yacht documents. Not the pretty catalogs they displayed for visitors, the real papers, the ones that proved what I'd done. The yacht wasn't a gift. It wasn't a family purchase. It was the first thing I'd ever bought that no one handed to me. I remembered loading freight in the early years, running deliveries while the business found its legs, wearing steamed blazers in gas station bathrooms between stops. When it finally profited, I bought the yacht quietly. I put Lyle's name on the papers for tax reasons, because that's what you do when you're building a life with someone. You share the paperwork. You don't question it. But the Prestons never questioned it either, they simply rewrote it. In their version, the yacht was legacy. It was theirs. And I was just the woman who married into it. And that was answer enough. I poured myself a cup, left his apology unfinished on the counter, and went to the dining table. There, I spread out years of moments I'd trained myself to overlook. The baby shower invitation that never arrived. The group photograph at Callum's birthday where I was cropped at the shoulder, barely in frame. The Thanksgiving dinner where I sat at the overflow table while Valora's hairdresser took a seat up front. It had always been there. I'd simply refused to see it. That's the quiet violence of casual exclusion. It teaches you to gaslight yourself before anyone else has to. As afternoon light softened behind the rooftops, my phone buzzed. A text from Jen, someone who moved in Lyle's circles but had always been kind to me. Thought you should see this. The attachment was a screenshot, the yacht's pre-boarding guest manifest. 10 names confirmed. My name wasn't among them. The heading read, Cabin Assignments, Confirmed. Valora hadn't accidentally left me off a list. She'd done it officially, professionally, with the precision of someone who'd planned it long ago. I typed 2 words back to Jen, "Thank you." Then I opened the family group chat, dormant for months, and composed my reply to a silence I hadn't been part of. "I'll see you in Newport. I trust there will be room." I sent it. Read. No replies. Not one. The phone call took 3 minutes. The answer it would reshape everything. I dialed Ronald's office directly. His assistant answered on the second ring, and I spoke my name clearly, Marjorie Wells, and asked for confirmation of our joint ownership status on the yacht. There was a brief hold, the kind where you hear the faint hum of someone else's desk, and then the answer I already knew but needed to hear spoken aloud. Yes, I was listed as co-owner with full equal rights. I requested a clean PDF copy of that contract, and a printed one as well. I'd pick it up in the morning. With that, I zipped my suitcase shut. Inside, it wasn't clothing. It was years of silence, folded neatly and ready to be unpacked on my terms. The sun hadn't fully climbed out of the horizon when I stepped out of the car. There was still that thin marine haze hanging above the marina, softening the glint of steel rails and ivory hulls lined up like polished teeth. Newport smelled like money that didn't need to introduce itself. I wore a simple black dress structured with a high neckline and a light tan coat that moved with the breeze. No jewelry beyond my wedding band. No statement heels. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for a moment I had been preparing for. A light tan coat moved with the morning breeze. No jewelry beyond my wedding band. No statement heels. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for a moment I had been preparing for silently, methodically, without once speaking its name aloud. My suitcase clicked softly across the dock as I pulled it behind me. The wheels didn't wobble. That mattered more than I expected. Then I saw her. Valora stood at the far end near the boarding gate. Her posture was perfect, hairpin just so, smile frozen mid-conversation with a guest I vaguely recognized from someone's second wedding. She looked up and she saw me. For a breathless second, her face stopped moving entirely. Eyes narrowed, hand midair with a champagne flute. If there was ever a moment where sound seemed to die around someone, this was it. Lyle turned too. She said something. I couldn't hear what, but her expression didn't carry shock. Just mild inconvenience. Lyle was there. Of course, he was not by my side, but at the perimeter of their circle. He didn't wave. He didn't move. I didn't slow. As I approached, the group around Valora began to pivot their bodies away. Not with aggression, just enough to form an unspoken barrier, as if social choreography could erase reality. I stopped just before them, said nothing, and waited. I had learned that silence was not emptiness. It was space. And space, I was beginning to understand, was something they had never intended to give me. The evidence had been gathering for years like sediment at the bottom of a still river, quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. Every brunch I wasn't invited to. Every invitation that somehow never reached me. Every family moment where I was the assistant, the plus one, the guest in my own marriage. Then came the text that an assistant accidentally forwarded, Valoris words glowing on my screen, "She's not coming." I handled it. 5 words that summed up everything. But the memory that shifted everything was simpler. The yacht wasn't a gift. It wasn't a family purchase handed down like some inherited crown. It was the first thing I ever bought that no one handed to me. I ran the deliveries myself, wore steamed blazers in gas station bathrooms, worked through nights that blurred into each other. And when it finally profited, I bought it quietly. I put Lyle's name on the papers for tax reasons, a convenience I never imagined they'd wear like a badge of ownership. The Prestons had simply rewritten history. And I'd let them. I stayed seated in the lounge longer than necessary. Not because I was tired. God knows adrenaline alone could have carried me through the week, but because it was useful to watch people try to recover from a loss they didn't see coming. Valora's composure cracked just enough to reveal the tremor underneath. I'd seen that flicker before in small doses, but now it played out in full view of her curated audience. The crew member's voice dropped to a respectful tone just for me. "We've been waiting for your clearance before departure." I met her eyes. "Proceed." She nodded, then walked toward the captain's station. I moved through the lounge, past the floral centerpieces that screamed velour, past the strategically arranged place settings meant to announce a hierarchy. I didn't sit. I didn't acknowledge. I just kept walking, through the main salon, down the portside hallway, and out onto the aft deck. There, alone, I finally exhaled. The marina began to drift away as the engines hummed to life. Land pulled back slowly at first, like a reluctant child being told it's time to go home. I set my suitcase down and gripped the railing. Not tight, just firm. Not to hold on, but to let go. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't an afterthought. I was the gatekeeper now. But beneath the surface of that polished deck, beneath the champagne and the orchestrated smiles, there was a paper trail and a memory that told a different story. I'd been collecting the evidence for months without fully understanding why. A screenshot of the brunch invitation that somehow never reached my inbox. The email confirming my cabin had been released, cancellation processed, as if I was a booking rather than a person. Every photograph where I'd been cropped out, every introduction where I'd been renamed, the assistant, the guest, the one who was busy. Each piece fit into a manila folder labeled with a practicality, tax plus property, but it felt more like an exhibit. The assistant's text arrived by accident. I wasn't supposed to see it, a forward that clipped the top of Valora's message, sent to the wrong recipient, landing in my inbox with the clinical precision of someone who thought the job was done. She wasn't coming. I handled it. 5 words. A quiet sentence that contained an entire strategy of exclusion. No meeting, no confrontation, no vote. Just a text message and an assumption that I would accept my erasure like I'd accepted everything else. And I might have, if the yacht had been theirs to give. But I remember the year I bought it, not from a showroom, not from a catalog, but from a conversation with myself in a parking lot at 5 a.m. I'd been running deliveries since dawn, my blazer still carrying the steam from the gas station bathroom where I'd changed, where I'd pressed the seams of professionalism into fabric that smelled like road dust and ambition. The business was finally making money. Not much, not yet, but enough. I walked onto that yacht the way I'd walked into every room I'd ever earned, alone, uncertain, and armed with a checkbook that represented years of sacrifice no one in that family had ever witnessed. Lyle's name went on the papers for tax reasons, a practical decision, not a symbolic one. I didn't think about legacy. I thought about efficiency. They rewrote it later, of course. The story softened in retelling, the family yacht, the Preston's tradition, the gift that kept the summers whole. No one mentioned the deliveries or the gas stations or the woman who paid for it all in quiet, unglamorous currency. No one except me. And now, I had the proof. Valora stepped onto the upper deck, angling her phone toward the golden afternoon light. I watched from the lower level, half hidden behind a canvas awning. She had her audience already, champagne glasses catching sun, a row of Preston faces arranged like accessories. "Hi everyone," she sang. "We're so excited to share a little slice of our family tradition today." She spoke of legacy. Of loyalty. Of building something that lasts. Each word placed with the precision of someone arranging furniture in a room she intended to keep. Behind her, movement. A crew member, young, efficient, unaware of the broadcast, walked past and said it clearly, "Glad to have you aboard again, Miss Marjorie." The owner. The phone didn't move. But Valora did. Her mouth stopped mid-shape. The broadcast hung in strange silence, just the hum of engines, the water against the hull. She tried to smile. It didn't reach anywhere. Callista leaned close to me, voice barely a breath. "That's going viral in 3, 2. I said nothing. I was still watching Valora's face, the way someone looks when the floor shifts beneath them and they can't decide whether to fall or pretend they meant to kneel. They think the moment ended when the camera cut. But it was just the beginning. Valora found me 10 minutes later, near the port hallway. She moved fast, heels clicking against the deck, eyes wild with the particular fury of someone who has just watched their performance unravel in real time. "You planned that," she hissed. Not a question. An accusation dressed in certainty. I met her gaze, unbothered, holding the glass I'd barely touched. "Planned what?" "Don't play dumb, Marjorie. You knew exactly what would happen." I set the glass down on the railing. The sea was calm beneath us, indifferent to the drama unfolding on deck. I didn't tell him to say it. I just let you speak your truth and watched it fall apart. She stepped closer, voice dropping to something sharp. "You don't belong here." I stood slowly. Not to intimidate, just to meet her at eye level. "That's the thing, Valora. I don't need to belong. I bought my place. She blinked like I'd slapped her. Then she turned and walked away, heels snapping against the wood, the conversation over not because she'd won, but because she had nowhere left to go. I returned to my cabin in silence. Sat on the edge of the bed. Opened the folder I'd been building since long before this trip was ever planned. Transcripts. Contracts. Bank receipts. Every piece of evidence I'd collected over months of quiet observation, not from rage, but from clarity. Each document told the same story, the brunches I wasn't invited to, the events I was only mentioned in passing, the moments I was reduced to the assistant or the guest in someone else's family album. I ran my fingers over the papers. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was ready. The dining salon glowed with soft curated light below, the remnants of the evening still humming with forced conversation and fractured nerves. But up here, in the quiet of the cabin, there was only the steady hum of the yacht itself, a machine I'd built, a space I'd earned, now filled with people who'd spent years pretending I had no claim to any of it. They could rewrite the history. They'd been doing it for years. But they couldn't erase the receipts. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the folder, ran my fingers over the transcripts, contracts, bank receipts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. The dining salon glowed with soft curated light, candle flames flickering against glass, gold flatware glinting beside folded linen napkins. Dessert had just been served, vanilla bean panna cotta with a dusting of citrus zest. No doubt Valora's touch. I hadn't touched mine all evening. I said nothing. I let them laugh. Let them perform. Let Valora run her scripted show, smiling like the live stream hadn't betrayed her 3 hours prior. When she stood to give a closing toast, her voice was polished, her cadence measured. I just want to thank everyone for being here, she began, her gaze sweeping the table with performative warmth. It's not just about luxury. It's about legacy. The people who keep our family story alive, who uphold its integrity, who understand the value of what we've built together. That's what makes this tradition so meaningful. She didn't look at me. Not once. But the subtext screamed in bold. I waited for the murmurs to settle, the wine glasses to lower. Then, without raising my voice or changing my tone, I stood. I'd like to contribute something to this conversation about legacy, I said. Valora froze with her glass halfway to her lips. The wine glasses lowered. The room settled. Then, without raising my voice or changing my tone, I stood. I'd like to contribute something to this conversation about legacy, I said. Valora froze with her glass midair. I reached down into my leather folder, pulled out a printed transcript on company letterhead, and laid it flat in the center of the table. Silence. Several people leaned in. Lyle didn't. He just stared at me like he'd forgotten how to breathe. It's from a Zoom call dated last month, I said, my voice steady. Between Valora and the Preston legal consultant. My finger tapped a highlighted sentence near the bottom of the page. She's not blood. She shouldn't own a family asset. Nobody moved. Valora's face drained of color. And yet, I continued, sliding a second sheet onto the table, this is the purchase agreement for the yacht. Initial down payment made by Marjorie Wells, sole investor, legal co-owner, listed first. Lyle opened his mouth, closed it again. I'm not bringing this up for drama, I said. I'm bringing it up because I'm tired of being spoken about in closed rooms as if I'm not standing in the next one. Valora cleared her throat like she might interrupt. But I wasn't done. For years, I've let things slide, snubbed invitations, comments said just out of earshot, credit shifted and conveniently forgotten. But let me be clear. This isn't about being included anymore. It's about being visible. Lyle's voice broke the silence. I didn't know she was doing this, he said, eyes wide. Valora, why? Valora opened her mouth, but only a stammer came out. I was protecting the family. I didn't think. You thought I'd stay quiet, I said softly. And you were almost right. A cousin coughed into her napkin. Someone else pushed back a chair. The atmosphere, so carefully manicured, began to splinter. Offord made a clumsy attempt to redirect. Perhaps we could table this for another time. No, said a voice from the far end of the table. It was Harold, a family friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I think we've all been told a different version of things. Others nodded, murmured agreements under their breath. Not outrage, not defense. Just realization. I looked at Valora again. You can keep building your version of the story. But not on top of my name. She sat down hard. I gathered the documents and returned them to my folder, then walked out of the room, not running, not angry. Just finished. The words hung in the air like the salt itself, then dissolved into the evening. I gathered the documents with care, not haste, there was no reason to rush. I had already said what needed saying. Before walking out, I paused at the doorway. If you want to know the truth, I said, don't ask the loudest voice in the room. Ask the one who has the receipts. The only sound that followed was the soft pulse of ocean water brushing the hull. No clinking glasses. No music. Just hushed voices behind partially closed doors, the occasional click of a cabin latch, and the kind of silence that fills a space after something irreversible has been said. I walked the outer deck barefoot, shoes in one hand, feeling the cool teak beneath my feet. The salt air stung a little more tonight, as if it too had sensed the unraveling. There were no long stares, no dramatic gestures, only avoidance. Small groups had scattered after dinner, splintering in their alliances like a house with no foundation. Even had vanished without a word. Then, as I passed the lower deck cabins, I heard her voice. Not loud, not theatrical. Just low, like a fuse burning quietly. She took it, Valora murmured to someone inside. It was always meant to be mine. The words floated through the thin cabin walls like smoke, and for a moment, the world tilted on its axis. She knew. She had always known. I kept walking, but something inside me had already arrived at a destination I hadn't known I was heading toward. Past the lower deck cabins, I heard her voice. Not loud, not theatrical, just low, like a fuse burning quietly. She took it. It was always meant to be mine. The words floated through the sliver of an open door, thin enough to ignore, but sharp enough to pierce. I didn't stop walking. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. She hadn't said she was sorry, only that she had been caught. Later, back in our cabin, Lyle stood by the small built-in dresser, folding a shirt he hadn't worn. Something about that made me angrier than I expected. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. He didn't speak right away. I think I always knew, he finally said, voice thick. Not the extent of it, but I saw things. He didn't look at me. I should have said something. Every time she made a dig, every time she left you out, but I thought if I kept the peace long enough, it would work itself out. I didn't interrupt. I let her write the script because I didn't want to be the one who ruined the show. I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. That was more than I'd ever had from him before. You still let it play out this long, I said. I know. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing, but from watching, from cataloging every small cruelty while your face stays still. I lay in that narrow bed and felt the yacht rock beneath me, slow and steady, like a lullaby the sea was trying to sing to someone else. Lyle slept beside me. Not deeply, but enough. Enough to escape the weight of his own confession. In the morning, before the rest of the yacht stirred, I sat alone in the lounge with a cup of black coffee and a notebook. No pen. Just the weight of it in my hands. I watched the light move across the windows and I waited. One by one, people came and went. Some paused at the doorway, offering nods that weren't quite apologies, but weren't dismissals either. Valora didn't come down, but others did. Lyle's cousin, Maddie, always too polite to pick sides, always navigating the middle currents of this family, lingered near the breakfast bar. "I should have spoken up a long time ago," she said, not quite making eye contact. She said it like a confession and an apology at once, a small offering laid at my feet. Then there was Lyle's aunt, the one who once told me I was too serious, that I needed to learn to let loose. She brought me an extra spoon for the sugar and said nothing. Just placed it gently beside me and walked away. It was nothing. It was everything. Ron, Tom's older brother, muttered something as he passed, half to himself, half to the air. I saw it coming. Didn't think it had crack like this. I wasn't sure what he meant by crack. The depth of the deception? The sharpness of Valoris' ambition? Or maybe the crack in his own silence that let him see it clearly for once. Each of these tiny acknowledgments formed something sturdier than the fake smiles I'd endured for years. Not a bridge, nothing so intentional. More like foundations. The kind you don't notice being laid until you look down and realize you've been standing on something solid all along. Back in the cabin that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. It was the same ceiling I'd stared at in every cabin on every trip they'd allowed me, one night in Monaco, two in Santorini, the time they forgot to book me a room in Nice and I slept on the lounge sofa under a borrowed blanket. All those ceilings. All those nights of quiet. But something was different now. I wasn't cataloging slights anymore. I was cataloging proof. Every nod, every spoon, every muttered confession, all of it data. Evidence of a truth I was only beginning to assemble, they had always known. Not just Valora. Not just Lyle. The whole family had known exactly how thin the ice was, and they had all agreed to walk on it together, pretending it would hold. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I was busy watching, and now, finally, I had something worth staying awake for. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock with raised lettering, slipped under my door like an afterthought. Valoris family dinner, mandatory, the note said, though I suspect she meant it only for me. I went. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see their faces when they realized I was still there. The yacht's main salon had been transformed for the occasion. Candlelight caught the crystal, and someone had placed fresh hydrangeas in blue ceramic vases, the family colors, I noticed, the colors I was never quite allowed to wear. Valora stood at the head of the table, her glass raised, her smile practiced. "This legacy," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "belongs only to those who understand what it truly means. To those who've earned their place at this table." I watched Lyle. His arms were crossed. His eyes were empty. And in that moment, I saw the shape of every silence he'd ever offered me, not protection, but permission. Permission for them to write me out. I didn't flinch. I didn't rise. I simply sat there, absorbing the words I knew I'd need later, and let them hang in the air. The transcript, I decided, would join the others. And when I finally typed that message to Valora, "I hope your speech felt honest," I wasn't asking for trouble. I was simply making a date with the truth. The toast was still warm, fresh fruit fanned out on ceramic platters, but the silence said everything. No idle chatter about the view, no cheerful commentary on the day's itinerary, just quiet. They didn't avoid me now. They didn't rush to include me either. They observed me cautiously, as though something sacred had been unmasked and no one quite knew how to honor it. I sat at the end of the table, hands around my mug, not triumphant, just present. And that alone had shifted the atmosphere. My phone buzzed around mid-morning. I stepped out to the lower deck to take the call. The voice on the other end was steady and unmistakably careful. "Marjorie, it's Ronald." His tone held the kind of weight lawyers reserved for when they were about to confirm something you'd always known but no one had ever dared say aloud. "I want to apologize," he said, "for even entertaining the paperwork. I knew it wouldn't hold, but I should have shut it down sooner. I let the silence speak for me. A pause. Then, you were always the rightful owner, on paper and in spirit. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. I thanked him and hung up. The waves rocked gently below me, like the boat itself was nodding in agreement. Upstairs, I found Callista waiting. Later that afternoon, Marjorie stepped out to the stern. Lyle stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon as though the sea itself might offer answers he couldn't find anywhere else. He turned when he heard her approaching. "I've been thinking," he said, voice carefully even, "about what I said, or rather, what I didn't say. For a long time now." Marjorie waited. She had become skilled at waiting. "I didn't protect you. Not the way I should have. Not when it counted." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, but he didn't look away, didn't soften the blow with qualifications or caveats. He wasn't making excuses. He was finally speaking the shape of his own silence, and Marjorie heard the cost of that admission in the fracture of his syllables. The waves below shifted. The yacht rocked gently beneath them both, holding steady, as if the water itself understood that some truths need solid ground beneath them before they can be spoken aloud. The quiet on deck had been a gift. But peace without truth is just another form of silence. A week later, Valora hosted a family dinner, the kind with candles and camera angles, where every moment is staged for posterity. I wasn't invited, of course. But Lyle sent me the video afterward, which told me everything I needed to know about where he still stood. In the footage, Valora raised her glass. This family has always believed in bringing together those who understand what legacy truly means. Her eyes swept the table, landing on the empty chair beside Lyle, the chair that should have been mine. Those who earn their place here. Those who contribute in ways that matter. Around the table, nods. Quiet approval. Lyle sat with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply watched his sister define me out of existence, and he said nothing. I pressed pause. There it was, the shape of his indifference, crystal clear now that I was willing to see it. Not cruelty, exactly. Just a vast, hollow silence where protection should have been. And I realized something that settled like stone in my chest: my silence hadn't just let them write me out. It had given them the pen. I printed the transcript. Slipped it into my folder, labeled now, Tax Plus Property, the evidence stacked neat as a court case. Then I typed a message to Valora. Not anger. Not defense. Just 4 sentences. I hope your speech felt honest. We'll see how it holds up in person. I pressed send. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the stillness of my own quiet house, feeling the difference between silence and stillness for the first time. Valora hadn't said a word since the documents landed on the table, not even her usual flurry of half-truths and tight smiles. She'd eaten alone last night in the lower salon, the staff politely offering her another glass of wine while no one else joined. This morning, I saw her seated inside behind the wide window pane, still as marble, hands folded, eyes unfocused. She caught my gaze. I didn't flinch. I just turned away. It was a strange kind of power. Not lashing out, not retaliating, but simply not giving her any more of my energy. Later, just before dinner, Ophelia approached me. She'd always carried herself with an air of quiet command, the matriarch in pearls who knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. This time she looked smaller. Not physically, but something about her posture had changed, less rigid, almost hesitant. I didn't see it before, she said without preamble. Now I do. I waited. That was all she offered. No apology, just recognition. It was enough. I didn't reply, just nodded once. The next morning, I walked down the dock alone. The yacht waited exactly as I remembered, white hull gleaming against the bay, flags snapping in the salt breeze. I'd seen it 100 times from the wrong side. From the shore. From the Instagram photos. from the cancellation email. This time, I stepped aboard. Welcome aboard, owner. The words came from Davis, the deckhand who'd worked for the family for years. Simple. Unadorned. As if he were stating the weather. I laughed. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was the sound of something releasing. A pressure I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there. The truth had been spoken aloud by someone who never needed my permission to say it. Behind me, Valora's smile turned to glass. The family went quiet, not surprised, but exposed. They knew. They had always known. And now everyone on this dock knew too. I didn't announce anything. I didn't have to. I simply walked through the yacht I had built, past the salon where I'd once served champagne as a guest, past the cabins where I'd once slept in the smallest room. I stood on the upper deck, wind catching my hair, and I breathed. For the first time, I didn't ask permission to stay. I just stayed. The house welcomed me like it had been holding its breath. Nothing had changed. Same creaky spot near the pantry, same stack of unread magazines by the couch. But everything felt different. I set the suitcase down in the front hallway and let the silence settle. No alerts. No missed calls. No new texts from Valora. For the first time in years, I didn't check for one. The days that followed moved slowly. I unpacked not just clothes, but everything I'd carried back from that yacht, documents, receipts, the printed transcript of Valora's toast tucked safely in my folder. I filed each piece of evidence like a record of something I no longer needed to prove. The folder sat on my desk, labeled and closed. I didn't open it again. Not because the truth had changed, but because I had. Lyle moved through the house differently too. Not dramatically, he wasn't suddenly transformed. But there were small moments. A cup of coffee left on my nightstand without a word. A hand that found mine while we watched television in the evenings. Not enough to undo years of silence, but enough to say, I'm still here. I'm trying. The yacht sat in the harbor now, 40 minutes away, waiting for whoever needed it next. I didn't go back that week. Or the week after. I didn't need to. The space had been reclaimed not by grand gestures, but by a single word spoken by someone who told the truth. Welcome aboard, owner. That was enough. That had always been enough. The texts from Valora kept coming. For the first time in years, I didn't check for one. I unpacked slowly over the next few days. Not just clothes, but everything I'd carried back from that yacht, the documents, the hard truths, a spine that had grown itself back without asking permission. By Wednesday, I was organizing the drawer in the hallway credenza when I found it. A small folded note, wedged between an old envelope and a forgotten grocery list. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, neat, purposeful. Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table. I had no memory of when he gave it to me. Maybe it was tucked inside a birthday card, or handed off after some forgettable family dinner where I'd felt invisible and he had noticed. I sat with that paper for a long while. The next morning, my phone rang. The name surprised me. Maya. Valora's niece. 23, worked at Whipsmart, just out of grad school. Always the quiet one in the corner who watched everything and said nothing. I hope I'm not crossing a line, she said. But I've been thinking about the trip. About you. I waited. You're the only one in the family who built something yourself. Not inherited, not married into. You made it. I didn't speak. I'm applying for this business mentorship program, she continued, and I wondered, could you? The call with Maya stayed with me long after I hung up. You're the only one in this family who built something yourself. Not inherited, not married into. You made it. No one had ever named it so plainly. Not Valora. Not Lyle. Certainly not the family who watched me deliver packages in steamed blazers and called it eccentricity. So a week later, I hosted Sunday brunch. Nothing formal, just eggs, toast, fresh strawberries, and people who had earned the right to sit at my table. Lyle made the coffee. Callista brought lemon bars. Ronald showed up with his wife, and I gave them the sunniest seat by the window. I didn't try to fill the house. I didn't extend an invite to everyone with the last name Preston. Just the ones who knew how to sit at a table and really talk. Not everyone needs to come, I told Lyle as he poured the coffee. Just the ones who belong by spirit, not blood. He nodded and kissed my temple. I had traded legacy for truth, and it fit better. Later that afternoon, as I was rearranging the dining room bookshelves, I found myself thinking about what he might have said if she had ever apologized. Maybe she would have blamed pressure or tradition or that false narrative of protecting the family name. And I'd have said, only to myself, never to her, I forgive you. Not because she deserved it. But because I was tired of carrying the weight of her silence. That table wasn't inherited or curated around social status. It was mine, picked out secondhand, refinished by a woman who learned to shape things instead of begging for a place. There was no toast that day, no speech, just conversation, real, unscripted, full of pauses and tangents and laughter that didn't need a camera. I looked around that room at the people who showed up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And I smiled. This seat was never given. I built it. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do isn't to fight louder. It's to stand still, to claim space without asking, and to stop apologizing for taking up room in a world that underestimated you. I used to believe that if I played by the rules, stayed quiet, proved myself, I'd earn a place at someone else's table. But the truth is, you don't need to be invited when you've already built your own. And somewhere across the water, the yacht waited, the one they all pretended was theirs, the one they used to rewrite me out of every family story. Soon I would step onto its deck and the staff would call me by a name none of them had ever dared to speak aloud. But that morning, at that table, I didn't need that moment yet. I already knew what I was. I was home. The morning the yacht was scheduled to depart, Marjorie walked up the gangway with her folder under her arm and her chin steady. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for it. What she hadn't prepared for was how quiet it would be inside the moment itself. The deckhand glanced at his clipboard, then looked up at her, and said the 4 words she had waited years to hear from anyone in that family, "Welcome aboard, owner." Marjorie laughed. Not the polite kind, not the kind she had learned to perform at Preston's dinners. A real laugh, the kind that escapes when the absurdity and the truth finally arrive in the same breath. The staff member smiled, uncertain but unbothered. He didn't know what he had just done. Behind her, the silence spread like cold water. Valora's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Lyle stood near the railing with his arms loose at his sides, staring at her as if seeing someone he had never really looked at before. Marjorie moved past them without stopping. She walked toward the bow where the water opened wide and the salt air carried the smell of everything she had worked for, every delivery run, every steamed blazer in a gas station bathroom, every quiet sacrifice no one had bothered to notice. She stood in the space that was always hers. And for the first time, she didn't look back to ask if she was allowed to be there. She wasn't asking anymore.